Today we are going to take the number guess game and we're going to actually take the text that before we had printing onto the console, which obviously whenever a person is actually playing the game, they won't be able to see the console. That's just an editor function. We're going to take all of that text, we're going to put it into our game so that all the instructions are visible to the player. So first I'm going to grab the text element right here. This is on my start game. And I'm going to, I already have my text written out that I want to put in here. So I'm going to take basically exactly what we had in our debug.log with the pick any number. I give them the numbers, and then when you've decided on your number, click start. And I'm going to delete this because I don't need that information anymore. Nobody's going to see it. The game is not like affected by it at all. It's just information that like lines of strings of text that was printing to the console. So now it's on here. Now the player has been given the direction. They need to pick a number between 1 and 1,000. And then when they've decided on the number, they're going to click start, which we know we've already hooked up so that whenever you click start, it will take you to the next screen. So just to demonstrate, when I hit start, go there, and we're on the next screen. You'll notice that all of that information from my console printing was still there. It's because I hadn't saved it yet. You saw there was an asterisk there before I ran it. So let's do that again. There. Now it's not on there anymore. So all of that text is gone for now. That's fine. We don't really need it at this moment in time. And we're going to do something a little interesting with our guess. First, we're going to feed our guess numbers into the text on the user interface. So on Save Our Start Game, on our gameplay scene, we want our guess to appear in here somewhere. So we want this where it says new text. Instead of it saying new text, we want it to say the guess that we want to guess for our answer. So we need to access this element from the code. To do that, opening up Visual Studio, on the game, we need to be using a different namespace. UnityEngine.ui. Okay, so we need to add a new item into our variables that we need to access. So actually, it's not a variable, it's going to be a game object that we are grabbing. So I'm going to type in public text. So public means that I can access it from anywhere. It'll show up in the editor and I can access that. Text, as you can see here, unityengine.ui.text is the default graphic to draw font data to screen, which is what we want to do. We want to put our font data, our guess text, we want it to display on the screen. So once we've named that, we want to give it a suggested name here. So let's call it guess text. So the reason I named it this way is that there's kind of a naming convention with variables and game objects is that your first letter of whatever or first word is lowercase and your second word is uppercase and every word thereafter is uppercase. Makes it easier to read and also easy to identify that this is the name of something that we are calling upon. So if I were to save this and come over here to our gameplay where we have attached guest text to, because our game is attached to the gameplay element. Guest text is right here, and I'm going to put that text right there and save it. So now that we've got it named and called, now it's time to tell it what we want to feed into it. So let's just come down here to Where do we want to put this? Let's put this in next guess. So we don't need the is it or higher or lower than part, or at least we don't need it in a debug.log. So we've calculated our guess, and let's call guess text dot text. So you can see the string value that this text displays equals guess dot to, and you see toString is already on here. So what this is, on next guess, we are calculating the guess, and then we're saying guess text dot text. So our guess text that we've already labeled up here, and that we imported using the drag and drop, we're going to change the thing that it says to our guess, which will be converted into a string, which means letters or numbers. It will be converted into a readable format. And we have all these buttons up here still that for right now aren't actually useful anymore because we already know that we're going to be pushing a button, right? We're not going to be actually hitting up arrow or down arrow. So instead of these, we're going to take some of this logic and we're going to reword it into functions that we can tie to those buttons. Because remember, we tied the quit button onto a button by creating a custom quit method, same for start game, so on. So I'm going to take all of the void update out. I'm going to copy it first. I have all that right here, just in case I want to grab any of this code again later. Usually wholesale deleting code, not highly recommended, but at the very least, I know where it is now. So whenever we start the game, I want it to go ahead and give me our guess. That way I can at least test and make sure that that's going to work. It's going to change the guess from 500, but that's okay. I don't necessarily need it to be anything else. There we go. So that you can see changed the text to what I wanted it to change it to. So we need a method for what happens when we press the higher and what happens when we press the lower. So maybe at this point, with all the stutters that I've had today, you have gone ahead of me. If so, I commemorate you because that's what we want. We want you thinking on your own. So I'm going to make this function called onPressHigher, meaning on the time that I click the higher button, it's going to do this thing. Whenever we had it go higher before the up arrow, we did these things right here. We can just grab these and put them back in here. We want our minimum to equal our guess, and then we want to calculate our next guess, right? On press lower, when we press the button for lower, we're just going to grab the information for this one right here. So now it should change based on those things. Let's double check and see how this is working right now. If I press higher, does it go up? Nope, doesn't go up yet. So let's double check what's going on here. We've set our number on guess. On start game, it goes to next guess. Oh, duh. So I need to hook it up to the buttons. Silly, silly me. So on higher, we need to add our gameplay to this. We need to look for on press higher, and that will hook it up. and on press lower. Oh, the number goes up now, and if we hit correct, we go to the next screen. That's fine. Okay. This stuff is going to be something we'll have to take the gameplay object out because right now it's saying, hey, there's a no next guess that it makes no sense. So that's fine. We can fix that in a bit. So back over here. We now make it so that whenever we push the higher button, it goes higher. We press the lower button, it goes lower. And our next guess is all figured out. Now, here is where it's interesting to note that this game is super predictable, right? You can always count on the numbers being exactly the maximum plus the minimum divided by 2. So it's going to be exactly between the two numbers, the guess that it just gave you and the highest number it could possibly be, or the lowest number it could possibly be. So what do we want to do if we want to make our game a little more random? Well, if you are looking at the Unity API, let's search for, let's go to Unity Scripting API. And let's search random and see what kind of comes up. We want to randomize something. So for generating random data, that's not terribly specific. Right here, random.range. Random.range returns a random float number between a minimum inclusive and a maximum inclusive. And it's read-only, meaning they can't change the number, it just finds the number and then gives it to you. So on this one, it loads a random level from the level list. So if you have a game that generates a random scene every time you start, this one is you recognize scene manager.loadScene, or at least scene manager.something. Random.range, 0 being the minimum number, inclusive, and the scene manager.scene count is how many scenes there even are, and it will pick a random number between those two things. So what do we want it to pick? We want our guess to pick between our minimum and our maximum. So we're going to go ahead and erase this part. Let's try out random.range. It's already filling it out for me a little bit. A float minimum and a float maximum is what we need to put on here. A float, we'll talk more about at another point, but basically a float just means a integer that could be a decimal point. So we want it min, because we already have that figured out, and we want it between the min and the max, like so. We end the statement. So now, if we play this game, let's see what happens. So now, 955, definitely not halfway between the two, right? So it's lower, 513, not halfway between 955 and 1. Lower than that, closer to 515, higher than that, 512, okay? So now we have a game that is actually dynamic and will randomly guess what answer we are looking for, which is fantastic because now it feels more like a game, right? And not something that's just like spoon feeding information to you. So let's change some of our text because this looks a little weird. Let's center it. Let's maybe, we'll put it right here. Make it bigger. Nice big numbers. And then let's add another text box for some just general telling people how, like, what we're asking of them. We're not just throwing a random number at them. So on this one, let's say, sure, nope, that's not how you spell your. So now it says, is your number higher or lower than? And then it will print our guess text. Let's see how that looks. much nicer, much prettier. And it's correct. We go to the next scene, so on and so forth. Perfect, 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 perfect. So now we have that all figured out. This is just called text, and this is also text. So let's maybe rename this one to instruction text. And this one, well, it's already called text in our, what do we call it? We called it guest text, but we just dragged in the text. So I think we can rename this safely. Let's call it guest text. Let's double check that that's still linked. Yep, changed its name there and everything, so we're good there. Save this scene. And on the end of our game, we need to make this say something other than just new text, right? So let's say, let's just say, I can't believe I got it right. Do you want to go again? Right, that's not how you spell it. Wait, yes it is. It just got cut off on the other side. Okay. I want to center that, centered inside the box. I think that'll look pretty nice. And we don't need gameplay on this scene, correct? Because there's nothing happening in the gameplay that this scene needs to know anything about. I'm going to just delete that whole game object. So it doesn't need to be there. So play again, takes us back to the front. This one has that same error because start game has the gameplay object on it as well because I duplicated everything whenever I was making it. So let's delete that. Start, we've got welcome, pick any number between 1 and 1,000 when you've decided, click start. Okay, is your number higher or lower than higher, higher, higher? Correct. Can't believe I got it right. Do you want to play again? Play again. Perfect. You have a game. You have a whole game from start to finish. It's very simple, but you've learned pretty powerful things about your user interface, how to create buttons, how to create custom methods that tell your buttons what to do. You've even covered a little bit of randomization with the numbers with random.range. That's pretty important. And yeah, I think that's all you really need to know in here is all that good stuff. We actually don't need this guess anymore, right? This is kind of extra because now it calculates the guess. So let's take that out. So our maximum and our minimum are set. They're set in start game, so that every time we restart the game, it restarts and knows exactly what it needs to be. We go to the next guess. Next guess tells it we want to give it a random number between the minimum and the maximum. We want to print that on there. Press the higher button, get a higher number. Lower button, get a random lower number. And then we have all our buttons hooked up. So I think you are done. You are all good. You want to go through and test your game in any number of sizes to make sure that it, looks good in said sizes. It doesn't have to look like there aren't many 5x4 screens left out there, but on the off chance that your player happens to have one, you don't want that, one thing bringing down your score on Steam that your game doesn't scale properly. So just always keep that in mind. And in the next lesson, I will tell you how to export your game and how to submit it for grading to me. And we will be ready to move on to the next lesson.